My name is Anne Clark. My maiden name was Riggs. I was born in Crossways, which is the house at the bottom of Kildare Hill. My grandfather built the house in 1926 and I lived there till I got married. I was born in 1942. At that time there was only 7 houses on Kildare Hill. There was Crossways, Coytrahen, Gwenamoyle, Kildare Cottages, Coytrahen Farm and Kildare Farm at the top of the hill. In Coytrahen Farm lived Henry Richards and his family. He was the blacksmith and he was the last blacksmith in Coytrahen. His sister and her husband and children also lived with him because he was a bachelor. In Box Cottages opposite Crossways there was Mr. Hitchens in number 2 who owned the 3 properties. Mr. and Mrs. Thomas in number 1. Mr. Thomas was a chauffeur in Tondy House. In the basement lived Mr. Spracklin. He was a local mole catcher and used to send the skins away to make moleskin trousers. Then Box Terrace. In the first house at Box Terrace, Mr. and Mrs. Lewis lived. That was the post office. Mr. Lewis was the same age as my grandfather and they were big mates. Below Box Terrace, Riverside. In Riverside lived my grandfather's brother, Peter. He was very eccentric and you'd always see him walking up the back in wellies, probably odd ones, because if one welly wore out, he only replaced the one welly. Always with string holding up his trousers, and quite frankly, he looked as though he could do with a damn good wash. He had chickens in the field opposite Riverside, and up to the age he died, which was in his late 80s, early 90s, he crossed the river, no matter what weather, on a chain and a piece of wire. He walked on the chain and held onto the wire with the feed for the chickens over his arm. Many a time we thought, if there was a storm, we thought, well, we'd all go down to check, but he survived it. I think they were a different breed in those days. In Bridge Cottage lived Mr. and Mrs. Robertson. They didn't have any children. Beyond Bridge Cottage were thatched cottages, which my Uncle Peter owned, and he decided to renovate them and took the roofs off and brought the walls down. Unfortunately, he brought the walls down too far, so they stopped in building. As you went up the hill and towards the main road, on your left was the beehive. It was a little one up, one down. The thatch on the roof was shaped conical and it looked like a pixie's cap. I can just about remember that. Now, the ruin is still there, but obviously nobody lives there. Then you went on further to Victoria Buildings. In number 1 Victoria Buildings lived Mr. and Mrs. Edwards, Horace Edwards and Kynwyn Edwards. Next door was Horace's brother, Dolph Edwards, and his sister-in-law, Emma. Then was Mrs. Ben Thomas, and further along was Mrs. Minnie Grono. Mrs. Ben Thomas and Mrs. Minnie Grono were great friends of my mother's because my mother played the organ in the chapel for many years and they all went to chapel together. And as children, we had an anniversary on March the 1st each year where we would all have to dress up and sing or do something. And then the best part was of course, we usually went to Barry on a bus after. It was usually Barry. Barry was the favourite place to go. In Oak Terrace lived Phil and his brother, and they were milkmen. They had a little farm on the top of Kildare Hill, and they walked up through the wood every day to milk the cows and bring the milk down. Further along was Miss Stiles, later on, who was a music teacher. And much to my shame, she taught me for many years, but to this day I still can't play a note. As you went further along then, on the right, lived my grandfather's other brother, Jonas, and his wife, Eliza. They lived there for many years, and they built number 1 Riverside with my Uncle Peter, but moved to farming later on and ended up there. So basically, the whole of our family lived within the village for a very long time. Further along was the church. I didn't go to church. As I say, I went to chapel with my mother. And every Sunday I had to go to Sunday school and then to the evening service. I didn't particularly like going because my friends were allowed to play, but Anne had to go to chapel with her mother.